Mollie here. Today we're going to be talking about Disney Doctor Who Season 2, Episode 4, Lucky Day by Pete McTeague. Since this is quite possibly the worst episode ever, I'm going to do a brief overview instead of a real blow-by-blow of the episode for the recap. Same as last week as far as minimum effort into that, because it doesn't really matter. And once we get through it, you'll understand why. A lot of people probably already know what happened in this episode. So with that said, I'm just going to get to it, and then we can get to the discussion. And boy howdy. Anyway, the episode starts out New Year's Eve, going into 2007. The Disney Doctor and Belinda land in London to get the reading for their Vindicator. They encounter this kid who saw them materialize, and they ask him what year it is. The Disney Doctor has found 50 pence on the ground. He gives it to the kid and tells the kid it's his lucky day. The kid goes to tell his mom, and she tells him to stop telling lies and cuffs him in the head, which no one seems to notice that she just hit her kid in public. And the mom then tells him that he's spoiling her night. And she's drinking, and she's with what appears to be her boyfriend and not the kid's father. So whatever. Then we get a voiceover from adult Conrad, the name of the kid. And he's talking about how he was 8 years old when he first saw the police box. And if you've seen Love and Monsters, you know the rest of the first half of this story. Because little Conrad is now big, and he has a podcast about things like the Disney Doctor, and he's got Ruby on his podcast. Conrad is talking again how last year he saw the TARDIS, he hears a growling sound and follows it into what looks like an abandoned department store. There are a whole bunch of mannequins covered in plastic, which makes one think of the very first episode of 2005 Rose, with the Nestine consciousness, and it definitely reminded me of Clive, the internet guy that Rose sought out looking for information about the Doctor. But this is just a misdirect and member berries to make you think you're watching something better than what it is, because it's just piggybacking on the emotions evoked from a better time. So anyway, Ruby and the Disney Doctor are battling a creature called a shriek, which spits on people, marking them with a pheromone to be prey in the future. Ruby, and unbeknownst to Ruby and the Disney Doctor, Conrad, have both been marked, but the Disney Doctor gives Ruby an antidote while Conrad doesn't get it because he's too busy hiding. So a year later, Ruby's on Conrad's podcast, and they start dating, and she gives him the antidote and tells him to take it before bed because it will knock him out for about 8 hours, which is just a convenient plot device so we don't see that Conrad doesn't take it. Ruby goes to meet Conrad's friends, and it appears that there are multiple shrieks attacking. Conrad discloses that he never took the antidote, so Ruby believes the shrieks are there for him. Unit comes to deal with the shriek situation, but then it turns out that the shrieks are all just people in costumes. Apparently, Conrad was playing a long game to expose Unit lies, and his whole podcast, all this time, was a lie in and of itself, to expose Unit's wasteful spending. He insults Ruby, he insults the Unit wheelchair employee, because let's face it, we don't know her name, because she doesn't need one. Her whole existence on the show is to be representation for the disabled community. So evil Conrad has a man on the inside who gets him inside the Unit building. And I guess Conrad shoots him. Anyway, Conrad confronts Kate Lethbridge Stewart, insults her father, and she goes bonkers and says she doesn't remember Conrad, but she knows all she needs to, that he's butthurt because she interviewed him for a Unit position a number of years earlier, and he got turned down, and Kate said that she wrote in her notes, "Don't trust him." Then she unlocks the Shriek's crate, which is luckily sitting right there outside the door of the office. She asks Conrad, "What do you truly believe?" The Shriek hunts Conrad and is about to attack him when Ruby tases it. Conrad thanks Ruby, but then he stands up and starts talking about how their special effects are improving. And then the Shriek leaps up and apparently bites his arm off. It ends with the Disney Doctor visiting Conrad in prison. The Disney doctor lectures Conrad about how the Disney doctor is fighting a battle on behalf of everyday people who just want to get through their day and feel safe and warm and fed. Because that's not condescending at all. And then along comes this noise. Conrad, cowards like Conrad, who weaponize lies, taking people's insecurity and fear and making it currency, and how tedious people like Conrad are, and how they have no other strategy than to wear people down. But the Disney doctor, he has all the patience and time in the universe. Conrad laughs at the Disney doctor and asks the Disney doctor if he's met Belinda yet. The Disney doctor says, who? And then asks if Conrad wants spoilers, and then tells Conrad that he will die in prison at 49, boiling in anger and poison, alone, unloved, and forgotten. Yada, yada, yada. Conrad says, I don't accept your reality, doctor, and demands to be put back in his prison cell and tells the Disney doctor to get off his world. The Disney doctor snaps his fingers and Conrad is back in prison. Then Mrs. Flood shows up, because no episode is complete without Mrs. Flood now, and she tells Conrad she's the governor, and it's his lucky day, and she holds the keys up and jingles them, the implication being that she is going to let him out. The end. I know I've said before that I'd never seen... Oh, hell. This was the worst episode I've ever seen. All the bad episodes before this pale in comparison to what this was. And it's no surprise to me that the person who wrote this, Pete McTeague, is the same one who wrote Kerblam, because that episode, to me, was pushing the worst kind of civility politics, telling oppressed people, truly oppressed people, workers, the lower classes, to know their place and only go through appropriate channels when trying to take on enormous corporations who are basically killing them. This episode, I don't know. I don't know what they think they're doing. I don't know. I don't know. They really, the motivation for this character was ridiculous, because it was clear that this Pete McTeague did not understand what motivated his character at all. And the fact that he set this guy up as being an abused child who apparently didn't get a job with UNIT, so then he creates this podcast to create a long game to expose UNIT. Are you kidding me? This guy would dedicate all that time to doing that, and then basically to say this guy is doing nothing but peddling lies, even though this guy knows what the truth is. And I have never seen such a severe case of creating a straw man and then beating on it. These elites who are writing for Hollywood and apparently the BBC now, they are so out of touch with reality that they cannot accept the fact that our criticism comes from a genuine place. It all must be lies, where we're just ists and phobes, and what they're doing is just perfect, and we aren't living in reality because what we're saying is just so ridiculous that it can't possibly be that we believe these things. It has to be, we know what the truth is, but we're just peddling these lies to try to, prey on somebody else's insecurity? How does that even work if we all know that this is a bunch of lies? Or it's just the people with the podcast know it's all lies, and they're just preying on even stupider people? I don't understand. Like, the first half of this episode, honestly, in a Love and Monsters kind of way, and even in Rose, the first episode of 2005, I was okay with it. Yeah, the guy seemed dorky and goofy, but at the same time, in this day and age, okay, fine, whatever. That's what they seem to think these young males are supposed to be, whatever. I wasn't offended by the first 20 minutes, I would say. Right up until it was exposed that this guy was a scumbag. And that's when this episode went off the rails, and I was like, wow. So, you stole from these other episodes. I'm sick of seeing that crap, but whatever. But then, I don't even know what to say. This was ridiculous. This was the same kind of caricature that we saw in 73 Yards. This is one of those instances where it was almost so over the top bad that it was funny. Almost. It didn't quite get there, but it almost was.
You mentioned Love and Monsters and Rose as far as the first half of this episode. the video blogger, the conspiracy theory guy. I would also argue the setup that they had between Ruby and Conrad, was that really all that different than how it was set up in the Robot Revolution between Belinda and her not quite fiancé? Isn't this essentially the incel story 2.0? Couldn't Belinda's not fiancé probably hang around Conrad and they would get along quite well?
I was probably a member of Conrad's group.
I give them credit here. I'm going to give them a positive here. At least they used allegory poorly, but they used allegory versus just taking real world events and directly mapping them into a story idea. So, yay. But it was so over the top. I'm going to be careful how I say this, but because Conrad didn't take his antidote, that they're all in danger now of this great thing outside. I'm just trying to think if there was something over the past 5 years that if you didn't take the antidote, you were told you were putting other people at risk. Again, they used allegory, so okay. I agree with you, Molly. The first half of this was just ripping off Rose, Love and Monsters, and honestly, I'm going to argue a little bit of Robot Revolution, something they just introduced this season. And if it would have continued down there, it would have been a normal rating. We usually give something like that, a 3 stars or whatever. But then after he turned on Ruby and exposed what he was representing, I'm saying this with a lot of thought behind this. And the people who have been on our channel for a while know what this means. This was on par with the worst I've ever seen in Star Trek Discovery. And I mean that as the insult that people should hear this as. I didn't like Love and Monsters, didn't like that episode from Russell's first era, but I would rather watch that than this again. Because at least there were pieces of that episode that I might be able to get something out of. It was at the beginning of the episode, but still. It was derivative stuff at the beginning and then turned into they jumped the shark. They truly jumped the shark, then went back on the boat, and then went up the ramp and jumped the shark again. Whatever credit we were trying to give last week to these people making the show, thinking, well, they're borrowing material, but at least it felt like a Doctor Who episode. I don't know what this felt like. It felt like garbage is what it felt like.
It felt like propaganda, because the next thing I want to talk about is how the messaging in this seemed to be that if you question your government, if you question what they're spending money on, especially in the areas of defense, that somehow that makes you a bad person. Because that's what this came down to. They were demonizing Conrad and people who question where our tax dollars are going. And I recognize that this is a UK-based show. However, it's on Disney Plus here now. So, sorry guys, this is half American at this point.
Like you said, I realize this episode wasn't intended to be a attack against criticism of U.S. government, but I'm taking this as a Western government. Look at the Western governments in our world right now. And every single one of the big governments, they are fighting massive corruption in their institutions. And it's not one political party. Anybody who thinks, oh, this party got in, yeah, they're the corrupt ones, but once we get the other party in, we'll be fine. It doesn't matter. Their corruption lasts throughout administrations. It's just so disappointing that the allegory they chose to use here, the messaging they chose to use here, is one of, if you ask questions versus what the official narrative is, that you're a bad person and that you're living in your own reality and that you're just not willing, no matter, in this case, the allegory was that demon hound or hellhound, whatever that was biting on that guy's arm to the point of ripping it off. And right before that, he got up and said, hey, that was pretty good special effects. The whole point being that even if you tell these people, you show it to them, the reality, they're just so in their bubble that they just will not break out of it, which kind of reminds me, because I was telling Molly this episode reminds me of Dot and Bubble, in the sense of the second half of that, the very end actually, when they never stated that it was a racism problem on why that group wouldn't go with the doctor. But if you did come to that conclusion, Russell was slyly trying to point out to you, well, that was your own internal biases that were popping out. And I think that's what he was trying to do here. I know he didn't write this, but his staff did this. Same type of thing, where the stuff that we're mentioning was never mentioned in the episode in narrative. But if that's what we think, we're just letting our own biases creep out here. It's always our biases that creep out, never theirs. That's just what's so interesting, because that speech that the doctor gave at the end was such full of venom. And when that Conrad laughed at the doctor after the speech, that was like the only good thing Conrad did.
And told him to get off his planet.
Because that speech was such a pile of garbage that I would have laughed at the doctor if he would have given me that speech.
Yeah, because let's talk about feeling safe for a minute. Anyone who thinks they're safe, they are living in a delusional fantasy. Well, there is no such thing as being safe.
That speech was interesting because the wording they chose, where it said something like, people just want to feel safe. Not be safe, just feel safe.
Yes.
They just want to have the illusion of being safe. And you guys online mucking up your stuff like you're doing is affecting that feeling of safety.
Because there are a lot of people out there who would give up the rights, their own rights and the rights of others, so that they themselves feel safe.
You either have free speech or you don't. I realize the only caveat there is there's a fire in the movie theater, let me cause panic.
Well, that and things like slander, actually telling lies about people.
Because I can already hear the people in the comments saying, there's some speech. Like, I get that, okay? But you should be able to have debates about things. Remember 73 yards. We weren't allowed to talk about tomato.
Yep.
Because even when we did it in our video, we had somebody in the comments that was accusing us of certain things. Very similar to what the doctor and unit were doing to this guy. And all we were saying is, can't we just talk about the topic? We're not even trying to say you have to have this opinion or that opinion. Can we just talk about the topic? And the answer is no, you cannot.
No, we're not allowed to even discuss the topic. I'm an American. Sorry, guys. We've got this thing called the Constitution, and the First Amendment is the freedom of speech. And anyone who would just give that up, you're a fool. And how dare you try to do that for the rest of us, just so you feel safe? How dare you? Safety is an illusion. Bad things can happen to people at any time. This is where a lot of victim blaming comes from too, by the way. And it's all because somebody wants to feel safe. There has to be something that you did that brought it on yourself. Because otherwise, I can't think about the alternative, because the alternative being that bad things can happen whenever to whomever. And they can't live with that kind of fear. These are the people who can't live with fear. People who would go along with, well, I just wanted to feel safe. We should all feel safe. So don't you dare say anything that makes me feel unsafe.
I'm just going to say this because normally I have a lot of reasons in the modern era to not be very proud to be in the United States. But the idea that we have a very unique thing in this country, the Bill of Rights, specifically that First Amendment, that is causing all sorts of problems with the elite trying to shut us up, because that's baked into our fundamental law. And they're having a bear of a time. The best they can do is try to slide some label of terrorism to strip that away from you. But that's something very unique that I'm actually proud of, is that they're having such a bear of a time in the United States trying to silence us, because that First Amendment is baked in there. They can't do anything about that. All they can do is label you a name and try to strip away your citizenship so you lose that right. But that's the best they can do.
Questioning taxation is the very basis of our country. No taxation without representation. This is telling us, well, you're not allowed to question taxes, where your tax money is going. You can't question that. Oh?
At the end there, in their own narrative, when Kate Stewart allowed that creature, at first I thought, well, she's just going to scare the crap out of him, which I probably would have been okay with that in the narrative. But when she was basically going to let that creature kill him, You just justified what he was accusing you of to begin with, wasting money on the illusion of safety. He was a British citizen. He was a Western world citizen. UNIT is tasked to protect that. Like, in narrative, she proved him right.
Yes. It went to show that for people who don't go along with the narrative, who they decide to be problematic, that rights don't apply to those people. And I would argue that's the whole point, is that you have to be willing to protect the rights of people you can't stand, to protect those rights in general.
It's easy to protect the rights of speech that you agree with.
Yes.
Hey, I agree with them. Of course they should talk. But if somebody's speaking something you don't like, that's where you test how committed you are to that ideal.
Yep.
Do you believe in free speech? That person's talking garbage that I don't agree with, but they should be allowed to say it, because it's not a matter of popularity on whether speech should be allowed. At least that's my idea as an American growing up in this country. That's what it should be. And again, going back to our First Amendment right, that's what bothers these people who are trying to stop that, is it's such an inconvenience to have that First Amendment there.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to say other Western governments don't have some protections in place, but it's not the same thing as our First Amendment in the United States. That's something very unique. It's like the fundamental pillar of our government. If you take that away, the rest of our government just collapses, because it's baked right into the whole system, not an add-on later on.
Well, yeah, because right in there, within the First Amendment, is our freedom of the press, which again, it's the right to ask questions of your government. It is one of the checks on the power of the government. And unfortunately, it's been extremely subdued. It's a problem. Yet, apparently, we're in the wrong for saying that you should be allowed to question your government.
Well, a few years ago, I remember a journalist, I think it was on, well, I'm going to be careful calling these people journalists. Somebody on CNN in the United States was claiming we shouldn't look at certain documents that were released to the public, because that would be dangerous for us to know that information. And I was like, what? Like, no, of course I'm going to be able to read information and make a decision for myself. What are you talking about?
Well, it's like that film V for Vendetta. Remember, in the plot of that movie was that there was an illness that killed a bunch of people and everybody was scared. They surrendered a bunch of their rights to the government. And it came down to, if it turns out that your government was behind the whole thing, would you want to know? And I think a lot of these people, the answer would be no.
Yep. They would rather feel
safe.
What were the three things? Feel safe, feel warm. Well, he didn't say feel warm, but it was part of this.
Feel safe, be warm, be fed.
And so you could apply that feel to the other two things as well.
Yes.
Because, we can make a discussion about how well we're fed in the States here with our
we're overfed with garbage
additive food. So
yeah.
we're shoved full of calories, but whether that's well fed, that's a whole different discussion. So this episode did spark a bunch of debate, at least between Mollie and myself, but I don't think it's the discussion that they wanted to have there. It reaffirmed more than ever that this is not entertainment they are pushing. This is
propaganda.
Star Trek Discovery level propaganda.
Yeah.
And I was trying to be kind to this franchise last week by offering what I thought was a balanced take on last week's episode, trying to give them the benefit of the doubt that maybe even though they were borrowing from their older works, they were trying to make a Doctor Who episode. They were not trying to make a Doctor Who episode this week. This was propaganda of the highest or lowest order, depending on how you want to rank that. And I am embarrassed for Disney Plus, the BBC, and Russell Davies. These people should be ashamed of themselves, but they're not. They are the moral superior to nobody. Nobody. They are confused about what morality is. And in fact, I think they probably would put amoral as their description. We're beyond morality. They're into this new era of whatever they think they're moving into. I realize I'm an old man. So I've got some values from when I was younger that I'm holding on to. And I try to listen to new media to try to feel out, well, how are people thinking about things now? And, is there anything I can incorporate into my value system that was formed over many, many, many decades before now? But there's nothing to discuss here. This episode didn't introduce any concepts to debate about. It didn't offer any sort of moral dilemma that you're going to have to ponder, well, geez, maybe I need to rethink my philosophies. This was just, if you disagree with the government narrative, by default, you are an enemy to the state, and you need to somehow be silenced because you are causing unrest with the populace. And we cannot allow that, we meaning the government. This was disgusting. I mean, this was truly disgusting. I don't know what to say. All I can say is this is what television now has turned into. It's not about entertainment. It really is about education, or in some cases, re-education.
Indoctrination.
In case you have the wrong thinking about stuff, they're going to try to fix that for you. That's how nice they are. They're going to try to see if they can help you out. Both Mollie and I, after this was done and we watched the episode, we were questioning, do we want to continue even reviewing this series? This garbage. I'm at a point now where I don't know if I want to do any more Doctor Who reviews, because this was horrible to sit through.
Well, I'm going to see it through to the end, but the good news is that this is probably going to be the end. The end of this season? Yeah, I don't think they're making any more of this shit. I just don't. I'm just going to say, for the record, I will never stop questioning my government. I'll never stop questioning pretty much everything. And that's my right, apparently God-given, according to my Constitution.
It's drilled into the Bill of Rights. We are supposed to, as informed Americans, our job is to do just that.
Exactly. And I will continue to do that.
I don't know why they're not offering entertainment to us to distract us from all the horribleness that's happening in the Western world. You would think they'd want to keep everybody asleep and content watching space battles and heroes out in far distant solar systems. Real heroes, not what they've redefined a hero, but real heroes, so that we'd all be distracted by what's going on television and the movies. So as they're gouging us, as they're ripping us off here in the real world, we'd all be distracted and asleep, and we wouldn't be paying attention to what they're doing.
Oftentimes what you used to get was that in times of crisis, that's when stories of hope would be written. It was to distract us from the horrors going on around us. And you get that dystopian shit when things were going okay, because that's when people's minds could wander into that stuff. But right now, I would argue in the United States, my God, we've got a housing crisis where very few people can afford a new house. Cars now cost the same amount a fucking house did when I was young. A brand new car. So good luck getting that.
People sleeping all over bridges, underneath bridges now.
Oh yeah, we got a homeless crisis, healthcare. Oh my God, the bankruptcies from healthcare people, the number of people dying per year because they don't have any healthcare or their healthcare is crap.
That's the warning I want to give those of you in the UK is, I know your nationalized healthcare system has problems, and I'm not trying to argue against that, but be very careful not to adopt the US's healthcare system, because you don't see a lot of TV shows and movies covering the major problems that are here in the States when it comes to healthcare. So be careful before you throw away your current healthcare system, which I agree has problems. Be careful you're not trading it in for a whole other set of problems. Don't assume it's rosier over here, because it is not.
And keep in mind, when the old man was sick last year, it cost us nearly $10,000 out of our own pockets to pay for our share of his health care. The insurance, they don't really pay for very much. So we're stuck with the rest of that bill. And if we didn't have insurance, the negotiated down price, it would have been twice that.
So please, yes, I'm not defending the problems your healthcare system in the UK has, okay? You guys, I'm sure in the comments, can let me know of all the problems that you have there. I'm just warning you, do not adopt what we have here in the States, okay? I don't know what other plan you guys want to go towards, but don't adopt what we have here in the States.
Unless you have $10,000 lying around.
I'm not trying to say that there is a elegant solution that'll fix everything here. I'm just saying be careful of saying the grass is greener over there. I'm pointing out to you that our media does not cover all the problems that we have in the States, so don't assume those Americans figured that out, because we did not. So please, I guess just what I'm saying is, before you completely trash your nationalized healthcare system, be deliberate with what you're doing, and don't just do it because what you got sucks. Make sure you're moving towards something better. That's all I'm sharing the old man's experience over the past 6 to 8 months of what he's dealt with in the States. Is just be careful what you're trying to go towards. Just do the research before you say, yep, we're trashing this and moving toward a states-based insurance thing, because that's just a bad idea. I don't know what the proper solution is. I'm not going to pretend the old man has the answers. I don't know, because I see problems with pretty much any way healthcare has been implemented in the world, at least the Western world. I don't know much about the Eastern world, how they handle stuff, but when people brag about our military budget, they don't realize there's a price that comes with that, because all these other nations have some sort of government-funded healthcare system, and we do not. So why don't you add up your healthcare system and add up your military budget and then see if that number is closer to what we spend on our military alone? Anyway, to get back to this episode, would I recommend this episode? No. In fact, I'm pondering if Mollie's going to have to do the rest of this season on her own. We'll wait and see how I feel after a couple of days. But after watching this, I'm starting to question what's the point of doing these reviews. They're not going to get any better. Chronicling all the mistakes they're making, there was some value in doing that. But this is the second episode this season where they were bringing up this idea of this incel problem that's out there. However they're defining incel. I don't think they're using the term correctly, but
it's basically anyone they disagree with at this point.
Yeah. Why did this guy have to be a white male? This guy this week. Why did he have to be a white male? Supposedly there's tons of representation everywhere, so why couldn't this conspiracy person have been a black female? Or pick whatever permutation of diversity you want to stick in there.
Well, 2 of this guy's friends were lesbians, and one of them was black.
Yeah, because they would make the argument, didn't you see that group? They were composed of many. Yeah, but he was the spokesman.
He was the leader. Yeah.
And then after seeing what they're planning on doing next week, it's like, so why couldn't they have had a representation person being the conspiracy person? It still would have been a crappy story, but that's just something to add on top of all this. This is such basic storytelling garbage. I don't know if I want to watch this show anymore. I really don't know if I want to watch it anymore.
Well, I had been watching it because up until now, there were at least parts where I could see where if they just got their act together, that they could have actually made something watchable. And that's where, with previous episodes, I'd say, you know what, I enjoyed the first 20 minutes, and then it went off the rails. This episode, first 20 minutes, all right, fine. Stolen from other episodes, I see that, but not horribly offensive. But then, when they went off the rails with this one, holy mackerel, I have never seen them go off the rails like this before, except for maybe 73 yards.
The end of Dot and Bubble.
Okay, that too. You know, this is beyond, just beyond.
That speech the doctor gave at the end in this episode offended me in a way that I cannot even describe. It offended me on the same level as Michael Burnham does on Star Trek Discovery, as far as spewing this condescending lie that's coming out of her mouth when she talks about stuff. And Ncuti Gatwa's doctor was doing the same thing. The BBC and Disney Plus, they owe us all an apology for what they did here. This is peddling hate, which is what they're doing right now. They are doing exactly what the doctor was accusing Conrad of doing at that speech at the end, saying that you're taking advantage of people's fears and making money and popularity off of their fears. And that's all that this series is doing that exact same thing. Most of us are not against a new world where people have different faces, different colors, different heights. We're not against that. We, at least for me, I embrace that. But if we don't have diversity of opinion to go along with the diversity of skin color, then is that really diversity that I care about?
No.
If everybody thinks the same, then what's the point? If you can't have debates with people who have differing opinions than you, then what's the point? Why say you have a free society if you can't have dialogue like that? Now, I'm not talking dialogue in such horrible situations. Let's have a debate on whether it's okay to, like, abuse animals. Like, I don't want to have that discussion. If somebody wants to, go for it, but I'm going to make fun of them with my own free speech on what they're doing. So I'm not trying to paint this in that same category, but if I want to have a discussion about different healthcare systems or whether we belong in a certain treaty organization, I should have the right to at least debate that topic and not be called names. There's nothing wrong with asking questions and debating stuff. I don't think there is. I don't know. Maybe that's a strictly U.S. point of view, but I don't think so. Not to be mean, but I've seen you UK people. You got big mouths too, and I've seen you shoot them off. So a UK person has a pretty big mouth as well. So I don't think it's just the United States that believes this. I mean, heck, we came from you guys when you think about it.
We threw a tantrum because we didn't like the taxes. And that being said, you know what? Again, this comes right back to, you're damn right we're going to question the taxes and where that money is going. How dare you? How dare you, sir? Yeah, because this also comes back to when you're not allowed to question things. That's how things work in an authoritarian regime or in a cult. And
despite if they call themselves a democracy, a representative democracy, like, forget the labels. You have to look if it walks and quacks like a duck. So if you're suppressing speech, whether you call yourself a democracy or not, you're an authoritarian system if you're suppressing speech.
Yes.
But that's just a simple matter of just seeing what traits you have, not putting a label on you. You're authoritarian in some sense if you're trying to get rid of any differing points of view.
Yes. And not only are you trying to suppress those points of view, you're trying to punish them. This episode was just such crap. Absolute, utter garbage. We should be able to have a conversation, to debate one another on the merits of our ideas using facts. We should be able to do that. That should not be verboten. Because all they do is label people, and they sit around and judge, and they have not made the world better. They've made it much, much worse.
They mislabel. As much as they accuse people of misinformation, they mislabel. They don't get all the information. They slap a label on you, and that label's wrong. It's like putting produce on a T-bone steak. It's like, did you bother to see what that was? These labels that they try to put on people, they don't mean anything. They're just smears. They don't have any definition behind them. They're just used as smears. And that's what I think this episode's about, is trying to smear and stigmatize people who are speaking up and saying, well, what's going on here? And I think that's what this episode offended me on, that level, is it's just a matter of trying to silence people and smear people in a very dot and bubble sort of way. They don't care about being accurate. They just care about being quote unquote right. Because right in their mind is not the same as accurate. Accurate is, well, is this true? No, I'm just in the right here. This is what the hive mind thinks is truth, so we're going to go with that. And that's what this episode was promoting, was a hive mind. If you are rocking the boat, there's a problem. That's what this episode was trying to stigmatize. So it offended me. Again, I don't know. Maybe it's just growing up in the United States, and I know what this country has meant to me. And I saw this as a slap in the face to everything I grew up. Hey, in this country, they're trying to stigmatize flying your flag out in your yard as some sort of right-wing racist activity. Flying the flag of the Union is somehow a racist activity now. I don't even understand that. You can fly a flag for identity, and that's fine. But if I try to fly the American United States flag in my yard, that's a racist activity. And I don't know what to say. I've heard it's worse in the UK, because at least people here still do fly the flag. And I heard in the UK, except for special occasions, you're not supposed to fly your flag. You guys in the comments can let me know if that's true or not, but that's what I've heard. How embarrassing to be... You're supposed to be embarrassed of the country that you live in. How embarrassing is that?
Yeah, I guess I'm all talked out on this. It was so offensive. So offensive.
It tapped into a lot of things that we've been fighting for the past 5, 6, 7 years.
Yeah.
That I think all came to a head after watching this crap. But a lot of this was bringing up things that we've been fighting for like a decade often online.
Yep.
And
This was a very much shut up and know your place. And, being an American, I know what my rights are. And the very first amendment to our Constitution is my freedom of speech, my freedom to question. And the basis of our government was we're not putting up with taxation without representation. And that representation is supposed to be our voice, the voice of the people. And this episode was the antithesis to all of that. What I have to say to Russell Davies and Peter McTeague, go f*** yourself.
So anyway, I don't think that it would be too far from me presuming that neither one of us are recommending this episode.
No, this is a terrible episode. Nobody should watch it. In fact, it should be taken out back and burned. Absolute garbage.
So next week, we'll see if Mollie's doing these reviews by herself or if the old man is going to show up. I guess stay tuned and see.
Until then,
take care.